I should have known better than to expect a warm welcome. As I stood in the doorway with my two kids, Mason and Ellie, I knew something was off. The dining room table was set, plates, silverware, wine glasses, all in place like they were hosting royalty. And every chair was filled with familiar faces. My parents, my sister Kayla, her husband, their kids, everyone but us. "Why are you here?" Dad asked, his arms crossed like I was a stranger at the door. My sister Kayla snorted, covering her mouth like Dad had just delivered the funniest line of his life. Mason shifted closer to me, clutching the sleeve of my jacket. "I just came to congratulate Kayla on her promotion," I said, holding up a small gift bag. "Thought it'd be nice to say hi." "Well," Dad said flatly, "there's no room." "Yeah," Kayla chimed in, smirking. "Only room for the important grandkids." I forced myself to breathe slowly. I glanced at Mom, hoping she'd step in, but she was busy pretending to arrange silverware, her eyes carefully avoiding mine. "Got it," I said. "Guess we'll head out." "Don't be dramatic," Dad muttered. "You can squeeze in somewhere." He paused. "But your kids don't belong here," Kayla finished, her grin widening. I clenched my teeth and smiled tightly. "Perfect," I said. "I'll stop sending those mortgage payments then." The room went silent. Dad's face twitched. Mom froze, still gripping her napkin like it might fly away if she let go. "What?" Kayla's voice was sharp now. "You don't need me, right?" I said. "So I'll stop covering the difference on the mortgage." "Shouldn't be a problem." I turned to Mason and Ellie. "Let's go." "You're not serious," Dad barked. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I shot back. "You told me we weren't welcome. Now you get to figure things out without me." As I turned toward the door, I caught my brother Ryan leaning against the wall. Unlike the rest, he wasn't smirking. He looked embarrassed. In the car, Ellie's little voice broke the silence. "Why doesn't Grandpa like us?" I kept my voice light. "They're just confused," I said. "But don't worry, sweetheart. We're gonna be just fine." And honestly, we were. For the first time in years, life felt easier. No constant phone calls from Mom asking for money, no guilt trips, no stress about juggling their bills on top of my own. Just me, my kids, and my wife, who was 8 months pregnant, getting ready for the baby. Then, one evening, there was a knock at the door. Ryan stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Hey," he muttered, "can I come in?" I barely got him to the kitchen table before he blurted it out. "Kayla lost her job." I blinked. "Already?" "Yeah," Ryan sighed. "Apparently, she spent her whole paycheck before she even got it. Thought she had it made." He gave a dry chuckle. "Guess not." "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "Karma works fast." "It's worse than that," Ryan said. "Some guy at her job convinced her they were close. Then he stole company money and pinned it on her." He sighed again. "She's not just fired, she might get sued." Yikes. I leaned back in my chair. "So what now? Dad wants me to fix it?" Ryan didn't answer right away, which told me everything I needed to know. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "Look," Ryan said, "I'm not saying you owe them anything. I just thought you should know things are falling apart over there." "Good," I said firmly. "Now they know what it feels like to be unwanted." Ryan shifted in his seat. "Just don't do something you'll regret later." "I won't," I promised. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I meant it. A week passed, and for once, life felt calm. Without those extra mortgage payments draining us, I could finally breathe. My wife, Rachel, was nesting hard, folding tiny clothes, rearranging baby supplies, and humming to herself like nothing else in the world mattered. Seeing her like that made me forget the mess with my family. Then my phone rang. Midnight. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring, then it rang again and again. Rachel stirred beside me. "Who keeps calling?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "My mother," I muttered. "At midnight?" Rachel blinked herself awake. "You should answer." "I shouldn't," I said, turning the phone face down. "Whatever it is, it's not my problem." Moments later, a text from Ryan popped up. "Pick up, it's bad." That got my attention. I called Ryan back. He answered on the first ring. "Stan," he said breathlessly, "Dad's having chest pains. You need to come over." I sat up. "Wait, what? He doesn't look good, man." Mom tried calling Kayla first, but she's ignoring everything. She's been crying all day about her job and, I don't know, she's just gone dark. I almost laughed. The golden child skips out when things get tough. What a shocker, Stan, Ryan said, his voice tight. I know you're mad, but just come. Rachel sat up, watching my face. You're going? I sighed. Yeah, I just want to see what's happening. Be careful, she said quietly. I pulled into my parents' driveway and knew something was wrong before I even knocked. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt small, fragile, like it was barely holding together. Inside, Dad was slumped in his recliner, face pale and sweaty. His chest rose and fell like he'd just run a marathon. Mom hovered beside him, wringing her hands. Stanley, thank God, she gasped. Your father's! Did you call 911? I cut in. Mom blinked like the thought hadn't even crossed her mind. Jesus, Mom. I grabbed my phone and dialed. While I spoke to the dispatcher, Mom paced the room like a frantic wind-up toy. The paramedics arrived fast. They hooked Dad up to a monitor, asked him some questions, and one of them turned to me. It's not a heart attack, he said, but his blood pressure's dangerously high. It's stress. I almost laughed out loud. Of course it's stress. As they loaded Dad into the ambulance, Mom clutched my arm. Stanley, please, we need help. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Help? A week ago, you couldn't get me out the door fast enough. Tears welled in her eyes. I know, but things are different now. We need you. I let her words hang there. A week ago, I was nothing to them. Now I was their only option. No, I said. Then I turned and walked out. For the first time in years, I felt free. No guilt, no pressure, just peace. The next morning, Rachel watched me sip my coffee. So, how bad was it? No heart attack, I said with a shrug. Just stress. And her eyes narrowed. You didn't help, did you? I told her no, I said, setting my mug down. Just like they told me. Rachel's eyes widened. You actually said no? Yep. Walked right out. She stared at me for a second, then smiled like I'd just scored the winning touchdown. Wow, she said. Who are you? I have no idea, I chuckled. I was finally starting to relax when there was a sharp knock at the door. Rachel sighed. Let me guess. I opened the door to find Ryan standing there, looking pissed. You seriously just left? He snapped as he shoved past me into the kitchen. Yeah, Ryan, I sighed. I left because I'm not their personal ATM anymore. He ran a hand down his face. Dad's still in the hospital, and Mom's freaking out. And Kayla? Still ignoring their calls. I smirked. Wow, must be tough. Look, Ryan muttered. There's more. You know that $4,500 you gave them to pay off their debt? I froze. Yeah? They spent it. He let out a dry laugh. Didn't even go to the mortgage like Dad said. They gave some to Kayla, blew the rest on new furniture, and God knows what else. I clenched my fists under the table. You're kidding, I wish. Ryan rubbed his face. Now the bank's after them for the mortgage, Dad's still in the hospital, and Mom's barely holding it together. They're in deep, Stan. Not my problem, I said coldly. Ryan sighed. Look, I get it. I'd be pissed too. But they're scared. They've never been this scared before. Good, I muttered. They should be. Ryan studied me for a second. So, there's nothing they can say to change your mind? Nothing, I said. Ryan gave a short, bitter laugh. Good, he said, because I'm with you. That caught me off guard. Wait, really? Yeah, Ryan said. I told them last night they had to deal with this on their own. Dad lost it. Said if I wasn't going to be part of the family, I could get the hell out. He shrugged. So, I packed a bag and left. You serious? I stared at him. Where are you staying? Motel, Ryan muttered. Not great, but whatever. Dude, I said, you're not staying in a motel. Pack your stuff and come here. You sure? Ryan asked. I know you've got the baby coming soon. I don't care, I said firmly. You're not staying in some dump alone. Pack your stuff. Ryan exhaled, relieved. Thanks, man, really. When he showed up later that night, duffel bag in hand, he looked exhausted, like all the years of being the backup kid had finally caught up to him. I clapped him on the back. Welcome to freedom. Ryan chuckled, but it sounded tired. Yeah, guess we're both out now, huh? Guess so. And for the first time in a long time, that felt just fine. The next few days felt weird, peaceful, but weird. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring with another family crisis. No panic texts from mom, no guilt trips from dad, no smug messages from Kayla. Just quiet, and honestly, I was fine with it. Ryan started to settle in. The guest room was tiny, barely enough space for his duffel bag and some clothes, but he didn't complain. He spent most evenings helping Rachel with chores, moving furniture to make space for the baby, or just hanging out with Mason and Ellie. For the first time, it felt like I had an actual brother again, not just someone stuck between me and our parents. Then, late one afternoon, Mom's car pulled into the driveway. Unbelievable, I muttered, watching her from the window. She seriously drove here? Rachel asked. Looks like it, I sighed. Guess she's not done with me yet. When I opened the door, Mom stood there looking rough. Her hair was messy, her face blotchy like she'd been crying. Stanley, she said, her voice shaky. Please, we need to talk. I didn't invite her in. About what? She swallowed hard. Your father's still in the hospital. They're keeping him longer because his blood pressure won't stabilize. The stress is, it's killing him. I leaned against the doorframe. And that's my fault? No, she said quickly. But we might lose the house. The bank's threatening to start foreclosure. We can't afford Dad's medical bills. And Kayla, she broke off, wiping her eyes. She's not answering our calls. She hasn't even visited your father once. I stared at her, unimpressed. Wow, I said dryly. That must be hard. Her voice cracked. I know we treated you badly. I know we pushed you away, but we trusted Kayla. We thought she'd take care of us. We thought she cared. Yeah, I said flatly. You chose her over me. And now you want me to clean up her mess? Mom's face crumpled. Please, we have nowhere else to turn. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Then I smiled. Not out of kindness, but because I finally understood just how far they'd fallen. Figure it out, I said. Mom's face went pale. You don't mean that. I do, I said. I really do. I started to close the door, but then she snapped. You owe us, she yelled, her voice sharp and ugly. I froze. Excuse me? You owe us, she repeated, stepping forward like she might push her way inside. We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, gave you everything. And now you're just going to turn your back on us? I laughed. Loud, bitter, and sharp. Everything? The first shot back. You treated me like a backup plan. The second Kayla looked like your golden ticket, you tossed me aside. You didn't care what happened to me or my kids. And now that she's gone, suddenly I matter again? Mom's face twisted in anger. You're being selfish. Selfish? The first snapped. I paid off your debt. Almost $5,000, gone. And you gave half of it to Kayla so she could buy new furniture and take a weekend trip. Don't talk to me about selfish. Mom's mouth opened, but no words came out. Good luck, I said, stepping back. You're gonna need it. I slammed the door in her face. Rachel was standing at the end of the hallway, one hand on her belly, watching me. That was intense. Yeah, I muttered. And I'm done. I thought that was it. I figured they'd finally get the message and move on. But I was wrong. 2 days later, Ryan's phone rang. I didn't know what they said to him, but when he hung up, his face was tight. They want to work something out, he muttered. I scoffed. Of course they do. They're asking if. Maybe instead of giving them money, you'd just put the mortgage in your name. They'll pay you back monthly. I stared at him. You're joking. Wish I was, Ryan muttered. They're desperate, Stan. Not my problem, I said firmly. They've had years to get their act together. I'm done cleaning up after them. Ryan didn't argue. Yeah, he said. You're right. I blinked. Wait, what? I told them the same thing, Ryan said. Told them they were on their own. He chuckled darkly. Didn't take it well. Dad told me to get out, said if I wasn't going to stand with the family, I wasn't welcome anymore. I frowned. So what did you do? I left, Ryan said simply. Packed a bag and walked out. You serious? Yeah. He gave a tired shrug. I'm tired of being the backup plan too. I couldn't help but smile. Proud of you, man. Thanks, Ryan said. Then he let out a breath. But now I guess we're both officially out. Looks like it, I said. And honestly, I'm okay with that. For a while, things were quiet again. Mom stopped calling. Kayla didn't reach out. Even Dad stayed silent. It felt peaceful, like we'd finally broken free. Then, one evening as Rachel and I were setting up the crib, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked outside. It was Mom. Rachel groaned. "She's back?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Guess she's not done after all." The knock on the door was loud and sharp. I didn't answer right away, just stood there, staring at the door. "You want me to get it?" Rachel asked softly. "No," I said. "I'll handle it." I opened the door just enough to see her face, red, puffy eyes, hair still a mess. "Stanley," she whispered. "Please." I shook my head. "I'm not your safety net." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "You chose Kayla over me. You gave her everything I worked for. You made your choice." I paused, then added, "And now, I'm making mine." Then I closed the door, not with anger, but with peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally putting myself and my family first. And honestly, it felt good. Days passed, and for once, life felt stable. Rachel and I kept busy getting things ready for the baby. Mason and Ellie seemed happier too. No more awkward silences when the phone rang or tension hanging in the air. Even Ryan looked more relaxed. He wasn't just staying with us, he was part of our family now. But of course, the peace didn't last. It started with a text from Kayla. "Congrats on abandoning your family. Thought you were better than that." I ignored it. A day later, Ryan's phone buzzed. Dad, this time. He stared at the screen, shaking his head. "I'm not answering," he muttered. "Nothing good's gonna come from that." But the calls didn't stop. Over the next week, they kept coming. Kayla, Mom. Even Dad tried again. We ignored every one of them. Then, one afternoon, Ryan walked into the kitchen looking pale. "So, I checked the mail," he said, tossing an envelope onto the table. "They're losing the house." I blinked. "Already?" "Yeah," he said. "Final notice. Foreclosure date set. They've got maybe 3 weeks." I stared at the letter like it was written in another language. Part of me felt bad. Watching your parents lose their home isn't exactly satisfying. But another part of me remembered all the times they'd made me feel like I didn't belong. The way they laughed when I tried to bring my kids to family dinners. The way they treated me like a walking ATM. I picked up the envelope and tossed it back on the table. "Not my problem." Ryan gave a short nod. "Yeah, I guess not." But deep down, I could tell he felt just as conflicted. A few days later, there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Mom. It was Kayla. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. "I've got nothing to say to you." "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly. I need to explain." "Explain what?" I shot back. "How you blew $5,000 on furniture and weekend trips while Mom and Dad were drowning in debt?" Kayla's face tightened. "I didn't ask them for that money," she said. They thought if they gave it to me, I'd fix everything. And yeah, I screwed up, I know that. But you don't understand what it's like. They put everything on me. The bills, their expectations, the guilt, all of it." I folded my arms. "Yeah, welcome to my world." She shook her head. "No, Stan. It wasn't the same. They believed in me. They never believed in you." Her voice softened, and I let it go to my head. For a second, I almost felt bad for her. But then I remembered Mason standing at that dinner table, his eyes wide with confusion when Grandpa said there wasn't room for him. "Too late," I said. "You made your choice." Kayla's face twisted. "Fine," she snapped. "But when they lose the house, don't pretend you didn't help make it happen." I scoffed. "They made their own mess." "Yeah," she shot back. "But now Dad's in the hospital, Mom's falling apart, and you're standing here acting like you've got nothing to do with it." I stared at her. "I don't have anything to do with it." She shook her head and turned to leave. "You're just like them," she muttered. "When things get hard, you disappear." I didn't answer. I just watched her walk back to her car and drive away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rachel was out cold beside me, her hand resting on her belly. I stared at the ceiling, feeling this weird knot in my chest, part anger, part guilt. I didn't owe them anything. They'd treated me like garbage. They'd pushed me out. But still, they were my parents. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Ryan, Mom's at the hospital. Dad's not doing well. I sighed, staring at the message for what felt like forever. Are you going? Rachel's voice came softly from the dark. I turned to her. I don't know. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Do what's right for you, not for them. The next morning, I drove to the hospital. Not because I wanted to save them, not because I forgave them, but because I knew if something happened to Dad, I'd never forgive myself if I didn't go. When I got there, Mom was sitting alone in the waiting room. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, quieter. When she saw me, her face crumpled. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. I sat down across from her. Is he awake? She shook her head. No, they're still running tests. They said his heart's weak. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy. Then she said quietly, I know we hurt you. I know we pushed you away. But Stanley, I'm scared. I sighed, tired of fighting. I get it, Mom. But you made your choice. I know. Her voice cracked. And I was wrong. She looked up at me then, eyes full of regret. Not the fake kind she used when she wanted money. This was real, raw. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. But I'm sorry. For all of it. For the first time, I believed her. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. But I'll think about it. And for now, that was enough. I thought that conversation with Mom would give me some kind of closure. It didn't. For the next few days, I felt stuck somewhere between frustration and guilt. Part of me knew I'd done the right thing by stepping away, but another part couldn't stop thinking about her face in that waiting room, tired, broken, afraid. Ryan noticed. You okay? He asked one morning as we sat on the back porch. He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowed like he was reading my thoughts. I don't know, I admitted. Feels like no matter what I do, I lose. Ryan leaned back in his chair. You're not losing, he said. You're just not playing their game anymore. I chuckled bitterly. Doesn't feel like winning either, he shrugged. Sometimes not losing is enough. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital. Dad was stable but weak. The doctor said he'd be discharged soon, but he needed rest and a lot less stress. That should have been the end of it, but later that night, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Dad. He looked frail, thinner than before, but his expression still carried that sharp, disapproving glare. I knew too well. Can we talk? He said. I wanted to say no, but something in his face stopped me. I stepped aside. He didn't sit down. Instead, he paced the living room like he was searching for the right words. I know you're angry, he said. And you've got every right to be. I stayed quiet, but, he continued, I need you to understand something. I did what I thought was best. I thought Kayla was stronger. I thought she'd carry things better than you could. I laughed dryly. Well, that worked out great. Dad winced but kept going. I'm not here to argue, he said. I'm here to ask if you can give us one more chance. I clenched my fists. You mean you're here to ask for money? No, he said quickly. I'm not asking for that. That threw me off. Then what? He rubbed his hands down his face. I want to fix things. Not just the house, us. Your mom. She cries every day now. Kayla's barely speaking to us. Ryan's staying here because I pushed him out. And you, his voice cracked. You hate me. I don't hate you, I muttered. But I don't trust you either. Dad nodded like he'd expected that. I get it, he said. And maybe I deserve it, but Stanley. He swallowed hard. We need you in our lives. Not for money, for family. I didn't know what to say. Look, Dad said, shifting awkwardly. I'm not here to beg, but if you ever decide you're ready, we'll be there. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'm proud of you, he said quietly, even if I never showed it. For a second, I didn't move. By the time I walked to the window, his car was already disappearing down the street. The next morning, Ryan found me sitting on the porch, lost in thought. Dad came by, didn't he? He asked. Yeah. Ryan sank into the chair beside me. What did he want? I rubbed my hands together. Said he wants to fix things. Not with money, just family stuff. Ryan snorted. Yeah, sure. That's what I thought, I said. But I don't know, man. He looked different. Like, I think he really meant it. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If you're thinking about letting them back in, he said carefully, just remember what happened last time. I know, I said, but maybe things can be different. Ryan shook his head. They're never going to change. Maybe, I said, but if they don't, I'll walk away again. A week later, I drove to my parents' house, not to fix things, just to see where they stood. The place looked worse than I remembered. The grass was overgrown, weeds creeping up the front steps. The curtains were drawn, and 2 trash bags were slumped by the mailbox, half ripped open. When Mom answered the door, her eyes widened like she wasn't sure I was real. You came, she said quietly. Just to talk, I said. That's it. She nodded quickly. Of course, please, come in. The house felt smaller somehow, quieter. The air smelled stale, like nobody had bothered to open a window in weeks. Dad was sitting in his recliner, looking tired but alert. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. I didn't sit. Neither did they. I'm not here to fix things, I started. I'm not here to pay off your mortgage or clean up your mess. I'm just here to say, I'll give you a chance. Dad sat up straighter. You mean that? I mean, I'm willing to talk, I said. But I've got rules. You mess with me or my family and I'm done for good. Understood, Dad said. Mom sniffled. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, I said. Let's see if you can actually change. I didn't stay long, just long enough to know I was giving them one shot. No more, no less. When I got home, Rachel was on the couch, half asleep with Mason and Ellie curled up beside her. Ryan was in the kitchen, flipping through his phone. Well, he asked. I talked to them, I said. Told them they've got one shot. He chuckled. Bet they screw it up. Probably, I said. But if they do, that's on them. Ryan smiled faintly. Proud of you, man. I smiled back. Yeah, me too. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally standing where I belonged. Not in their mess, not as their fallback plan, just me. And this time, I was okay with that. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, things felt normal. Dad had been discharged from the hospital, and though we weren't exactly close, we kept in touch. Every so often, he'd send a short text, nothing big, just a check-in. Hope the baby's doing well. Tell Mason and Ellie hi. Little things. Mom tried harder. She called a few times, mostly to ask how Rachel was doing or to see if Mason wanted to visit. I never let the kids go over, not yet, but I appreciated the effort. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like they were finally learning to respect my boundaries. I still kept my guard up. Ryan stayed with us longer than planned, but honestly, I didn't mind. The kids loved having him around, and Rachel did too, even if he did keep stealing her snacks from the pantry. You know you could just ask if you want cookies, she teased one night. Yeah, Ryan said with a grin, but sneaking them just tastes better. One morning while Rachel was resting upstairs, my phone rang. It was Mom. Hey, I answered cautiously. Stanley. Her voice wavered. I have some news. I braced myself. What now? Your father and I, W.E. sold the house. I blinked. Wait, what? We couldn't keep up, she said quietly. The payments, the repairs, everything was too much. The bank was closing in, and we knew we couldn't afford it anymore. For a second, I wasn't sure how to respond. You're moving? I asked. We found a small place across town, she said. Something we can manage. It's nothing fancy, but we'll be okay. I didn't know what surprised me more, that they'd finally accepted reality, or that they'd done it without dragging me into it. I'm glad, I said honestly. Really? Mom exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. I know this doesn't fix everything, she said, but we're trying. I believed her. For the first time, it felt like they were finally taking responsibility, not leaning on me, not expecting me to bail them out. I appreciate that, I said. Mom's voice softened. We're proud of you, for sticking to your guns, for standing up for yourself. I didn't know what to say to that. Anyway, she added, if you want to visit sometime, we'd love to have you. I'll think about it, I said, but no promises. That's fair. Her voice cracked slightly. Take care, Stanley. You too, Mom. Later that evening, Ryan and I sat on the back porch, beers in hand, watching the sky turn orange. So, they're moving, I said. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Yeah, I said. Sold the house. Found something smaller. Wow. He shook his head. Didn't think they had it in them. Me either. I took a sip from my bottle. Guess they're learning. Better late than never, Ryan muttered. We sat quietly for a while after that. Just two brothers, finally free of the weight we'd carried for too long. A week later, Rachel went into labor. It wasn't dramatic, no middle-of-the-night panic or racing through red lights. Just a calm, steady drive to the hospital. Hours later, our daughter, Sophie, was born. I held her in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around mine, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. No stress, no guilt, just my family, my real family, where I belonged. When we brought Sophie home, Ryan stood at the door grinning like an idiot. Look at you, he joked. Dad of the year. More like exhausted mess of the year, I muttered. Yeah, well, he smirked. You're doing all right. A few days later, I got a text from Mom. Would love to meet Sophie whenever you're ready. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I'll think about it. For once, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. Done trying to fix people who didn't want to change. Done carrying burdens that weren't mine. Done pretending I was part of a family that only remembered me when they needed something. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough. Months later, I did take Sophie to meet my parents, not because I owed it to them, but because I wanted to. Dad looked older, quieter, humbled in a way I never thought possible. Mom cried when she held Sophie, whispering promises about how things would be different this time. I didn't believe all of it, not yet, but I could see they were trying. And this time, I knew where to draw the line. For the first time, I wasn't their backup plan, their safety net, or their second choice. I was just me, and that felt better than I ever expected. Story 2, without my knowledge, I learned of a clandestine family getaway. Let this self-centered person enjoy Christmas by themselves. 2 weeks later, my parents told my uncle that they were sobbing resentfully because I had never anticipated being excluded from my own family's Christmas celebration. However, I should have anticipated it. In retrospect, I saw that my parents had been acting oddly, but I dismissed it as the typical Christmas stress. I was unaware that they were deliberately preparing to abandon me. Their kitchen renovation was the beginning of it all. Their kitchen was a complete mess, old, hardly usable, and in disrepair. In addition to offering my services, I also volunteered to contribute money, specifically $12,000. New flooring, appliances, countertops, and cabinetry. In addition, I worked at their house installing, painting, and making sure everything was flawless for several weekends. They also guided me. They seemed to like it, grinned, and thanked me. However, they were discussing behind my back how tired they were of me being there. It wasn't until 2 weeks before Christmas that my uncle informed me. Let this self-centered guy enjoy Christmas by himself, my parents murmured as they sat him down. They were already planning their own vacation to Hawaii. Charlotte, my sister, her spouse, and their son. I was not invited. Even worse, they instructed my uncle to be quiet around me. I was self-centered. I was the one who paid for their ideal kitchen, they stated. The one who worked on making their property appear spanking new in his spare time. I guess they were sick of me. Had it not been for my uncle, I would have been caught completely off guard. He was unable to conceal it. He told me everything over the phone. Before I invested so much money and effort in assisting them, I wish I had known sooner. But what was there for me to do? Request an invitation. Scream at them. I said nothing since it was obvious how they felt. I did admit that I was aware. I completed their kitchen's finishing touches. Allow them to make me grin. And then, without thinking about me at all, watch them take off for Hawaii. The fact that I wasn't alone for Christmas was the one bright spot. I received an invitation from my uncle. When we were alone, we had a terrific time. Lots of ranting, a nice lunch, and alcohol. Even though it wasn't the Christmas the first had planned, It was preferable to acting as though I didn't bother those who obviously didn't want me around. Then the most hilarious thing occurred. My parents began texting my uncle photos from their trip without even realizing he was with me. Images showed them standing in front of their resort, sipping drinks, and enjoying the beach. We simply sat there giggling at how absurd it all was when he showed them to me. I remained silent when they returned. Avoid conflict. No rage. Nothing but quiet. I made the decision to stop. However, everything blew out a week later. I assumed ignoring them would be simple. I reasoned that if they could act as though I didn't exist during the Christmas season, I could do the same. However, it was not long before things became strange. My mother texted me casually first. "I hope your Christmas was wonderful." As if she hadn't recently gone to Hawaii with the rest of the family for the holidays, while I sat at home, totally disconnected. I choose to disregard it. Then my father called. I let the voicemail go. Ryan, Charlotte's husband, called a few days later. This was not what was expecting. He wasn't the kind to call at random, but we got along well. Something urged me to answer the phone, even though I nearly ignored it. As I greeted them, I was aware that something was amiss. He said, "I just wanted you to know. I disapproved of their actions." I blinked. What? The journey? Not including you? I didn't choose it. I sat in disbelief. Ryan could have had an issue with that, but I hadn't really thought about it. I assumed he just followed Charlotte's and my parents' wishes. Before we departed, Charlotte and I had a disagreement over it. She didn't want to hear it, he acknowledged. I took notice of that. Ryan and my sister seldom got into arguments, at least not over family. They seemed to me to be the type of couple that simply got along, even when it wasn't fair. What was it she said? I inquired. According to her, your parents were fed up with you always visiting. He said that because you did so much for them, you made them feel bad about going on the vacation. That really made me giggle. They just stopped talking to me altogether rather than confronting their own remorse. Astute. Ryan let out a sigh. I said that. However, after we arrived, things worsened. Your mom lost it when I brought it up again. They deserved an unrestricted holiday, she remarked. I should let it go, Charlotte said. Ryan dumped something even heavier as I was attempting to take it all in. Man, I don't believe I can handle this much longer. I was completely stopped by that. What are you going to do? This family, the manner in which they handle others. It's too much for me to bear. I straightened my posture. Charlotte and Ryan have been wed for 5 years. He was speaking as if he was finished after they had a child together. I mistakenly believed that the drama was only about me, but it was obviously more complex. What took place? I inquired. Ryan paused. I promised Charlotte that I would give you a call when we returned. She went crazy, said that I was causing trouble. Thus, she continues to believe that she'd done nothing wrong. She believes that you are the issue. He acknowledged that you were irritable during the entire situation and that you disciplined her by ignoring her. I gave a headshake, incredibly so. Ryan then let out a sigh. Then I realized that this goes beyond the vacation. It has to do with their identity. My stomach fell because of the way he stated it. What are you saying? I mean, I doubt I could continue to be married to someone who finds this acceptable. I was at a loss for words. This was causing my sister's husband, who is the father of her child, to seriously contemplate leaving. And I had a feeling that was only the beginning. As I sat there, gripping my phone, I tried to take in what Ryan had said. He wasn't only upset. His entire marriage was being questioned. Are you serious? At last, I inquired. Ryan inhaled deeply. Yes, dude. Ever since we returned, it has been on my mind. I initially believed that the family turmoil was about me missing Christmas, but it suddenly seemed like something more significant was taking place. Then he made a statement that struck me deeply. There's more to it than you realize, he whispered. This journey, it was a catastrophe. I bent over. What are you saying? As though unsure of how much to tell me. Ryan paused. Then he simply opened up. We arrived there the first night. At the hotel bar, Charlotte and your mother became wasted. Not a huge thing, is it? Then your mother begins to complain about you. I let out a sigh. Naturally, she continued by saying that you were too involved in their lives and that they were at last receiving some time away from you. I tightened my jaw. Whoa. The worst part isn't even that, Ryan stated. She began discussing how she let you pay for the kitchen renovation because she anticipated that you would want something in return, that after interacting with you, she felt she deserved a new kitchen, so she agreed. I came to a complete stop. I nearly left at that moment, Ryan said. She simply shrugged it off when I informed her it was messed up. Charlotte told me it was simply the way her family is and that I was overreacting. My sister sounded just like that. She always made excuses and covered for her. Then Brian went on. Your dad attempts to pretend that nothing occurred, save for your mom the next morning. She was furious. Charlotte must have informed her that I didn't agree with her remarks. Thus, your mother betrayed me by telling me that I should be thankful and that I don't do enough for the family. I scowled. Hold on, what? She continued, by saying that I never help out around the house and that you spent $12. On her kitchen. I lost it at that point. I told her I wasn't going to finance my in-laws when they couldn't even show basic respect to their own kid. That clarified a lot. In particular, when someone marries into the family, my mom dislikes being questioned. I went, Ryan said. Charlotte was enraged when I returned from my walk to cool off. She said that I had made her look foolish in front of her parents. I gave a headshake. Unbelievable. Dude, he added, it got worse. For the remainder of the journey, she hardly talked to me. I wrecked Christmas, she insisted. Now what? I inquired. Ryan was quiet for a while. I think I'm done, he said. I was struck deeply by the weight of those remarks. He remarked, I can't raise my child in a family like this. He shouldn't grow up believing that this is the usual. I was at a loss for words. Ryan wasn't only discussing divorce. He was discussing the possibility of abandoning Charlotte. The first secretly didn't hold him responsible. However, I was unaware that the actual explosion had not yet occurred. It was imminent and would split the family in two. Ryan didn't waste any time. He sat Charlotte down and informed her. He was done 2 days after our talk. He wasn't upset. He didn't shout. He just outlined it. He couldn't continue to be married to a person who supported those who treated others like trash. He didn't want their son to grow up in such a household. Discovering that it was typical, Charlotte snapped. She made no effort to comprehend. She didn't inquire as to what they might do to improve the situation. She immediately began accusing me. She called my parents first thing in the morning, and as soon as they received the news, they did exactly as Ryan had expected. They made it my fault and changed everything. I was phoned by Charlotte, who yelled that I had poisoned Ryan to harm her, that I had planned to destroy her marriage because I was envious of her ideal family. I ended the call. That's not what I did. My mother then phoned. I paid her no attention. Next, my father? Directly to voicemail. Charlotte then sent me an SMS. You achieved your goal. I hope you're content. It was nearly comical. I had not taken any action. However, she somehow believed that this was all a part of my larger scheme to ruin her life. I assumed that ignoring them would be sufficient. I was mistaken. My parents arrived at my place that evening. My mother was shouting as I opened the door. Are you content now? I rested my weight on the door frame. I don't know what you're discussing. Your sister's marriage was dissolved by you. I gave a little chuckle. Oh, really? That's what I did. Ryan was turned against her by you. Opposed to us? Someone else responded before I could. Ryan. He had followed them over, and he interrupted as soon as he moved to stand by me. No, nothing Mike said was ruined. His tone was stern. You are to blame for this. My father betrayed him. Don't say it to my wife. Ryan folded his arms. Or what? A long, tense silence fell. Being challenged was something my parents weren't used to, particularly by someone who married into the family. Ryan was supposed to be on their side, they believed. Then a second vehicle arrived. My uncle was the one. He shook his head as soon as he was out. Incredibly so. My mother turned to him. You don't know what's happening. Yes, I do. That's what my uncle said. I am well aware of what is happening. Ryan saw through your nonsense, which is why you're upset. My parents appeared in disbelief. My uncle had always kept to himself and avoided the spotlight. They thought he would be impartial. He wasn't. He gave Ryan a glance. Son, you're on the correct track. Ryan gave a nod. Regards. That was it. I recognized then that this was more than simply a family dispute. This marked a sea change. My parents were unmanageable. Charlotte's spouse was about to die. And I wasn't the only one pointing them out for the first time. However, I was still unsure of how much worse things might get. Losing wasn't something my folks were used to. They were the type of folks who dominated the story at all times. They always made themselves the victims by twisting things. However, I wasn't the only one defending myself this time. Ryan was the one. My uncle was the one. They detested it as well. My mother's cheeks flushed. Because of him, you're ending your marriage? Pointing at me as if I were a sickness, she spit. Ryan gave a head shake. You're the reason I'm tossing it away. That momentarily silenced her. She simply stood there, unable to speak. My dad then sneered in an attempt to seem good. Oh, adult up. We went on vacation without him, and that's why you're upset. Ryan chuckled sharply. Do you believe this is about that? My father gave an eye roll. What else may it be? Ryan looked at my uncle. I take it you told him? Mom's remarks on Mike. My uncle folded his arms. Yes, I did tell him. He simply refuses to acknowledge it. I noticed a difference in my dad's countenance at that point. He was aware that he had most likely known all along. However, he doubled down rather than feeling ashamed or sorry. She was kidding. Ryan's mouth clenched. Do you really find it amusing that she boasted about making money off of her own son? Mom's arms flailed as she leaped back in. He was never utilized by us. Ryan looked across at me. Did they ever offer to reimburse you, Mike? Just once? I gave a head shake. Ryan gave a nod. There it is. The talk seemed to have been sucked out of the air. My folks were at a loss for words. Then my uncle said, You two are unbelievable, and shook his head in disdain. My mother's face dropped. Paul, please stop talking. My uncle chuckled directly at her. That's your response. Paul, stop talking. You only have it. My mother was now trembling all over. How much we've done for this family is beyond your comprehension. Completed for them? My uncle pointed to Ryan and me. It appears that you tore them apart. That was the tipping moment. My parents were aware that they were losing. What then did they do? When they didn't get their way, they always did the same thing. They rushed away. My dad was pulled behind my mom as she shoved past Ryan and my uncle. All of you are pitiful. She slammed the vehicle door after shouting. My father remained silent. Just got into the passenger seat. His face was inscrutable. The three of us stood silently as they drove away. My uncle then exhaled deeply. Well, that was enjoyable. Ryan gave his temples a massage. I must have a drink. After we entered and took a seat, I felt liberated for the first time in a long time. No more pleading with them for acceptance, no more feelings of guilt, no more games. But right when I believed it was finished, the situation became much more bizarre. Charlotte arrived at my home early the next morning. I have my bags. Her face was dripping with mascara. He abandoned me, she muttered. Ryan has left. Charlotte appeared to have just crawled out of a combat zone as she stood in my doorway. She had untidy hair. Her luggage rested beside her like a sign of complete failure, and her eyes were crimson. He abandoned me, she muttered. Ryan has left. What she wanted me to say was unclear to me. I apologize for telling you that. Rather, I moved aside to make room for her. She sat down on my couch and gazed at the floor in blankness. He claimed to have finished this morning after packing his baggage. Just finished. She was seated across from me. Did you not anticipate this? She gave me a scowl. Oh, stop pretending you were uninvolved. I chuckled. Let's get started. In the air, she sat up directly into her hands. He turned against me because of you. You gave him all these notions about how awful my family is as you sat there. I reclined. That's what your family accomplished alone. Charlotte shook her head and inhaled sharply. Now I have nothing. I'm divorced. I interrupted her, and my parents are inconsolable. They're inconsolable. I couldn't contain my laughter. Are you referring to the same parents that excluded me from Christmas? Who urged me to rejoice alone and branded me selfish? Charlotte's jaw tightened. That might have been corrected by you. I gazed at her in utter disbelief. What precisely was I meant to fix? At last, your spouse had the maturity to see through her nonsense, and I'm somehow to blame for it. She vigorously cleaned her face. Congratulations, then. You achieved your goal. I arched an eyebrow. Charlotte, what I want. I desired a trip with my family. Rather, I was discarded like trash. That's what you wanted? When they interrupted me, you supported them. You stood up for them when they took advantage of me. For years, you allowed them to treat me badly. And you want to mourn about it now that it has finally caught up with you? She didn't respond. Rather, she picked up her luggage, stood up, and rushed to the door. She turned around before she went out. This is something they will never forgive you for. I grinned. Excellent. Charlotte wasn't lying after all. My parents began treating me like their personal enemy after that night. If it hadn't been so pitiful, it would have been humorous. According to what my uncle told me, they went about accusing me of ruining our family. That I tricked Ryan into leaving because I was resentful and envious. They made a big effort to spin the tale. Do you believe that I forced him to file for divorce by keeping him prisoner at gunpoint? Ryan, the true kicker, wasn't finished yet, though. He texted me to sell the property a week later. Do you want to get a beer? I nearly spat my coffee out. My folks cherish this place, you see. They have lived at the lake house for many years. We can take summer vacations, getaways, and even a few Christmases. Every year, the entire family traveled up there. Who do you think owned it? Ryan's. A couple of years ago, he purchased it. Additionally, my parents regarded it as if it were their own because Charlotte was legally a co-owner by marriage. They said that they had a divinely granted right to use it whenever they pleased, but they never paid for upkeep, assisted with repairs, or made any contributions. My parents were devastated when they learned that he had sold it. They yelled at Ryan over the phone about how he was destroying their family customs. As if arriving with beer coolers and scattering filthy towels counted as an investment, my dad attempted to justify their extensive time spent in the house. Ryan silenced her. It is not yours. I do, and I will no longer tolerate your behavior. My uncle thought it was fantastic. He was laughing so hard that he phoned me. Oh, they are in a downward spiral, your mother said. Ryan is destroying the rest of our family after Mike first ruined it. The finest part, though, my uncle also ceased assisting them. You see, he had been the only member of the family who truly knew how to make things better for years. He was the one they contacted whenever something broke in their home, and he assisted them since he was a kind man. No more. He told them directly, "You treat me like trash. I don't do anything." All of a sudden, their house began to collapse. I had renovated the kitchen for them. They still had some tasks to complete, but I had no intention of returning to complete them. Their favorite lake cottage. It will soon be in a new owner's possession. Suddenly, the entire family was at war. Ryan, my uncle, and I on one side. On the other side are my parents and Charlotte, adversaries. It felt fantastic, to be honest. The fight continued for months without a definite conclusion. Even now, my parents still speak of me as if I were a villain. Ryan went about his business, focusing on his baby, while Charlotte hardly talked to me. The cottage sold. My uncle never again did anything to assist my parents. And gradually, their world started to fall apart. Then, however, things took a direction I didn't anticipate. Charlotte got married again. I didn't care at first. A few months after the divorce, she hurried into a new marriage, met a guy, and pretended that everything in her life was okay again. Charlotte's usual move. However, I later learned about her spouse, a man called Greg. Greg is an alcoholic. Greg was clearly more than simply a big drinker. In and out of employment, he was a disaster, always in debt, irritable, and totally untrustworthy. The real kicker then arrived. Greg's jewelry was gone, and I mean everything when I mention her jewels. Ryan's wedding bands, which Charlotte had somehow retained. The vintage jewelry that my mother had handed down. My dad's pricey watch, too. Everything is gone. Whether he pondered for alcohol or just lost it in a drunken stupor is unknown. In any case, my folks went insane. Naturally, who did they turn to for assistance when calamity struck? Me. My mother gave me a call. For the first time in her life, she attempted to seem modest, her voice trembling. "We truly need your assistance, Mike, honey. I understand that things have been tough." It nearly made me chuckle. "Oh, you do? Charlotte is currently having difficulties," I interrupted her and said. "Greg, you've made some mistakes." "It's not my issue." Quiet. She then attempted a guilt trip. "Our family remains together." I grinned. "Yes, How was the atmosphere at Christmas last year? A sigh followed by more stillness. That's it then? Are you simply interrupting us? I gave a shrug. That's how it seems. I ended the call. Ryan phoned me later. Laughter is dying. You will never believe this, dude. Yes, I believe I may. I got a call from Charlotte asking for assistance. I was genuinely taken aback by this. Hold on. After all? Yes. I was requested to assist her in getting back on her feet. I let out a whistle. Whoa, what were you saying? Ryan laughed. I told her that I would only send money for our baby. She lost it when I smiled at her, began to weep, said that she now had nothing. I gave a head shake. Whose fault is it then? Ryan let out a sigh. That's right. That was the end of it. The disaster my parents had created left them stranded. A drunken loser who lost all they owned was Charlotte's spouse. After that, Ryan focused on raising his child. Me with my uncle. We were all okay. Story 3. My parents wouldn't pay for the repairs I made to their house. According to my mother, we donated this money for your sister's trip. Dad chuckled, but I surprised them by spending 2 months of my summer renovating my parents' home. I worked late into the night, woke up early, and perspired through my clothing for 2 months. When I began, the place was in ruins. Leaky pipes and cracked walls, floors that squeaked as if they were going to collapse. They asked me to handle it since they couldn't afford a contractor, stating that they would give me $8,000 when I finished. Since they were my parents, I accepted, even though it wasn't much given the amount of effort. Nothing I accomplished was half-assed. In order to prevent the lights from flickering like in a scary movie, I replaced the floors, painted the entire home, and repaired the electrical wiring. When I was finished, I restored the roof, rebuilt their cupboards, and even laid out the front yard. Their home appeared to be spanking new. They were ecstatic. I was therefore unconcerned when I eventually sat down with them in the living room in anticipation of being paid. My mother was making a cup of tea for herself. My dad appeared to be completely carefree as he sprawled out in his recliner. My mother then remarked nonchalantly, "Oh, honey, about the money. Amanda received it from us for her trip." For a moment, I believed she was kidding, which is why I laughed. My dad also laughed a bit, as if this was a humorous miscommunication. "Sure," he said, shaking his head as if I were being goofy. Before the wedding, Amanda and Josh were in dire need of some time apart. They are going through a hard period. I looked at them, anticipating the line, "I'm kidding, here's your money." However, that aspect never materialized. "You handed Amanda my money?" I spoke it again, attempting to comprehend it. "According to my mother, it was legally our money and we assumed you wouldn't object. They just needed a brief vacation since Amanda has been under a lot of stress with the wedding preparations. It made sense because you often claim that you don't take vacations anyhow." Dad shook his head and smiled as if I were the one who was being irrational. A chilly pit formed in my gut. As if I were being insolent, "You promised to reimburse me for my mother's side. And someday we will. But Amanda needs it more today. You get it? Correct." I turned to face my dad, expecting him to say anything, but he simply sat back in his chair and continued to smile as if this were a lesson I should take away. I then added, "Well, I hope you realize that I've done everything I can for you." Her smile vanished in an instant. My mother looked as though I had just swore at her. No longer amused, my father sat up in his chair. They didn't anticipate that I would simply declare that I was done with them. Instead, they anticipated that I would be angry and perhaps even quarrel a bit. "Don't be theatrical, Brian." I got up, according to my mom. "Dramatic. I spent 2 months working on this property, and you simply handed my money away." My father sneered. "You don't really need it at the moment." There was no comedy in my laughter. People obviously didn't respect me, so I wasn't going to spend my breath arguing with them. I left. I ignored them when they called for me. A few days passed. I didn't answer their phone or text messages. I wasn't prepared to handle them. Then I got an unexpected call from Amanda. "Brian, how are you doing?" Mom called, but you didn't pick up. I spoke in a calm tone. "Did they explain her hesitation to you?" "No. You were unhappy over something, that's all." They didn't tell her, of course. I let out a sigh. "Do you know where the funds for your trip came from, Amanda?" Quiet. "What do you mean then?" "My money was given to you? The sum of money they owed me to repair their home? more quiet. I could practically hear her mind working. Hold on, what? Instead of compensating me for the work one accomplished, they offered me $1,000. Josh and you were given it for a trip. I believed she had hung up because she was silent for so long. Then she muttered, "Oh my God, I had no idea, Brian." "I believed so. I'll reimburse you. Everything. That was unexpected." "You don't need to know, Amanda." She cut me off. "I didn't know. I wouldn't have taken any money from them if I had known. I will return it to you today." I was taken aback. Although Amanda and I had always been close, I didn't think she would take responsibility for something that wasn't her fault. She returned the entire $8,000 to me that same day, as promised. And then, of course, chaos ensued. My phone called once more that evening. Mom was the one. I let the voicemail go. Dad called. 30 minutes later, followed by Mom. Then an SMS message. "Did Amanda send you any money, Mom?" "Me?" Indeed, that wasn't hers, she knew. Tens. She called later. At last, I picked up. "That money was not yours to take." She lost her temper. "In fact," I laughed. "Are you serious? You handed my money to her." She returned it to me. "We call that writing about." "She did it because of you," Amanda decided for herself. "You ought to be proud." She truly understands the distinction between right and wrong. As though I had just hit her, she let out a gasp. Dad picked up the phone. "Are you going to return the money to her now?" After I hung up, I thought maybe it was time for them to experience what it was like to be the one receiving if they were going to act like entitled, self-centered individuals. For the days ahead, my parents completely lost their minds. In addition to leaving me voicemails and lengthy, theatrical messages about how I was destroying the family over a few little bucks, they contacted me constantly. Dad even attempted to contact me, saying simply, "Return the money. This is the last one? Last one?" As if he were my supervisor or something. I choose to disregard it. Then my mother unexpectedly arrived at my flat. After hearing a knock, I kept hearing the doorbell ring. I scanned the crowd. She was there, folded arms and a furious expression. I considered not responding, but I opened the door since I knew she wouldn't go. Without waiting for an invitation, she entered. "We must speak." "No, we don't actually." With an exaggerated sigh, she produced a folded piece of paper and gave it to me. It was a rent bill. I scowled. "What is this? While we were renovating U8, you spent 2 months living in our home. We slept under our home, used our electricity, and prepared our meals. It's only right that you pitch in." I gazed at her. "I fixed your house for free for 2 months, and now you're charging me rent." "It wasn't free of charge," she fired back. "After we decided on a price, Amanda required the funds. It cannot simply be taken back." I chuckled. The fact that I can and did makes it amusing. She sighed. "Yes, we will charge you rent if you want to be petty about it. It's just..." Slowly, I nodded. "All right. I suppose it is only just that I bill you contractor fees for the renovations." She blinked. "What?" I took my phone out. Professional contractors charge roughly $50,000 for the job I accomplished. Subtract the $8,000 you owed me, and you still owe me $42,000. She appeared as if she'd swallowed a lemon. "Brian, don't be foolish." I grinned. No, you're right. It's just..." She opened and closed her mouth, then stood up. "Your father will hear about this. Inform him that I will accept wire transfers or checks." It was after she stormed out that I had an idea. I could play dirty if that was what they wanted to do. All of the remodeling receipts were still with me. The new fixtures, cabinetry, plumbing, and flooring. Technically, they were mine because everything had been bought in my name. I started taking things back when I drove over to her place the next day. With a vehicle and a toolkit, I drove up to my parents' house, determined to take back what was rightfully mine. I began with the most basic items. After unscrewing, the new outside lights were put into the vehicle. I had put some gorgeous new house numbers, and they looked great. I then entered. My key was mine. So, when my folks were away, I let myself in. I headed directly to the kitchen. I had the new cabinets installed. Mine. I took off all the doors, leaving them stark and open. The sleek contemporary faucet I used in its stead. The leaking one they used to complain about is no longer there. I moved around the home like a one-man wrecking team, working fast. Shelves were removed, and light fixtures were removed. I even took out their brand new shower head and put in the old, rusted, low-pressure one in their bathroom. I then reached the flooring. I spent hours installing the brand new hardwood floor. They promised to reimburse me, so I personally paid for them. Yes, those two. When I finished a whole corner of the living room, I went on my knees and began prying up the planks, taking care not to break them so I could use them elsewhere. In the driveway, I heard tires squealing. Oh! It blew open the entrance door. My father stood there with bulging crimson eyes. My mother was directly behind him, breathing heavily as if she had just entered a crime scene. "What are you doing?" my father shouted. I dab at the perspiration on my forehead. "Oh, just receiving my money back. That is not possible." My mother let out a scream. Holding one of the wooden boards, I got to my feet. "Yes, I can. Look, I purchased everything. Technically, this is my flooring because my name appears on the receipts." The hands of my father balled into fists. "You're a little ungrateful." I raised a finger. "Be careful now. Do not say something you may later regret. Our house is being destroyed by you," my mom cried. I pointed around. "No, I'm simply taking back what I've done because you didn't believe it was worth the money." Amanda entered at that point. She went in, took one glance around, and her jaw dropped, so she must have been on her way over. "Oh, God," she muttered. "What are you doing, Brian?" I let out a breath. "For the 2 months I was here, my parents are attempting to charge me rent. I'm only gathering my belongings." She jerked her head toward our parents. "Are you serious? You tried to extract additional money from him after first robbing him of it." Mom folded her arms. "This is none of your concern, Amanda. It does, of course. He deserved to be compensated, so I did. You are punishing him for it now." Dad took over. "We are your parents, Amanda. Please don't shout at us." "Then quit behaving like entitled kids." She fired back. They let out a gasp. "Really?" As though she had just cursed them in church. They gasped. Then my mother did something unexpected. "I'm amazed at how inexpensive you are," she added, turning to face Amanda. Amanda stopped. "What? Are you picking Brian instead of us?" With a tone full of displeasure, Mom spoke. "More than your own parents?" Dad gave a head shake. "You ought to feel embarrassed with yourselves." Amanda's cheeks flushed. I could sense her anger. She looked at them in a way I had never seen her do before. She then said something that caused me to halt everything I was doing. "What do you know?" She took her house key out of her handbag and tossed it on the ground. "I've had enough of you." She then faced me. "Do you need assistance with the floors?" I smiled. "Yes. Give that crowbar to me." As Amanda assisted me in tearing the house apart, our parents looked on in complete terror. I believed my parents had previously been upset. I believed I had witnessed the worst of them. I was mistaken. As if we were on a home remodeling reality show, I watched Amanda crouch beside me and pull up floorboards. Just the opposite, broke them completely. My mother began repeatedly shaking her head, seemingly in disbelief. "Now, Amanda, stop this." "You have no idea what you are doing." Amanda didn't even give her a glance. "No, Mom, I realize you're betraying us for the first time," my father shouted. Amanda chuckled to herself. "No, Father. I'm defending someone who is deserving." Then Mom broke out in tears. Not crying quietly, but crying sensibly, out loud, dramatic, crying as though she had been betrayed greatly. "God, oh God." She let out a cry. "It's unbelievable that this is taking place. Following everything we've done for you. For the two of you." Amanda and I looked at each other. Dad then did something that truly caused me to pause. "All right," he said to Amanda. "Don't bother attending the wedding if you want to betray this family." There was silence in the room. Amanda got to her feet slowly and reached for the crowbar. "What?" "I heard you," he remarked, getting to his feet. "Don't bother showing up on your special day if you want to support Brian. Josh and you are free to leave and lead your egotistical lives without us." Mom snorted. "Amanda, that is heartbreaking, but you don't give us an option." Amanda stood there, and I waited for her to retort, telling them that their behavior was absurd. She then gave a hesitant nod. Her face was unreadable. "All right," Mom blinked. "What? Don't you want me to attend the wedding?" "All right," Dad laughed. "Oh, stop being so dumb. You'll stutter back and say you're sorry." "No," Amanda cut me off. "I won't." She then faced me. Hurry up, I'm starving. We then left. I thought my parents would chase after us, shout, plead, and implore us to stop. But they remained silent. We walked to Amanda's car in quiet. We climbed in, shut the doors, and drove away. Amanda let out a deep breath and mumbled when we were halfway to a diner. This has gotten out of hand. I gave her a glance. Are you all right? She held on to the steering wheel. Not at all. However, you were correct. We are not respected by them. They are self-centered. I was at a loss for words. Then she gave a snort. Really? Dad's expression when I dropped my key. Well worth the effort. I smiled. Yes. And when you took up the crowbar, you ought to have seen your mother. Amanda chuckled. What are you going to do next? She inquired after a pause. I considered how they had taken advantage of me, acted irrationally and disrespectfully toward me. When I eventually retaliated, then I grinned. Oh, I haven't finished yet. For a long time, Amanda and I sat at the cafe, sipping coffee and discussing topics we hadn't truly spoken aloud before. How she was always given preference by our parents, but not in a loving manner. Since she was marrying someone they liked and they had always expected me to do things for them, no matter how much it cost, she was more like an investment. How nobody of us ever truly experienced their love. Only used. Amanda shook her head at one point. It's unbelievable that I'm even thinking about this. Our own parents are being invited to my wedding. I arched an eyebrow. Considering that you were just denied an invitation, they did you a favor, really. She seemed worn out, yet she chuckled. When I tell Josh he'll go crazy, I scowled. Hold on, is he aware of this? She paused. He is aware that it can be challenging, but I minimized it. Amanda? I let out a moan. I understand, I simply didn't want to burden him with all of the family issues. You know, his parents are very typical. Indeed, because he is marrying into it, he ought to be fully aware of the situation. She let out a sigh. You're correct. Tonight, I'll speak with him. Then she smiled. But first, what are you going to do? I smiled. Oh, you'll see. I called a couple of people the next morning. You see, my parents had been boasting to their neighbors, acquaintances, and even their extended family about their gorgeously remodeled house. They showcased their efforts on Facebook with photos. I thus made the decision to reveal the truth. I began with a straightforward post. Hey everyone, do you recall the house makeover my parents were flaunting? Fun fact, I was the only one who worked. They promised to reimburse me once I paid for all the materials. Rather, the funds were taken and distributed to my sister for a trip. Then, while they were fixing her house, they attempted to charge me rent for the period I was there. My sister gave the money back to me after learning about it, and our parents confiscated it and refused to let her attend her own wedding. Therefore, give my folks a call if you ever need a free renovation. Free labor is what they adore. After that, I tagged Amanda and a few family members in the before and after photos. I then turned off my computer and let the internet work. I was surprised by the blast. In an hour, there were lots of comments on my post. People were taken aback. A few others messaged me personally to inquire about its veracity. Family members were incensed. Even comments like, I can't believe they would do this to their own son were made by some of my parents' friends. Then I received a text from Amanda. Amanda, oh my God. And my mother has called me 100 times Amanda. Amanda's father. You have my utmost pride. My phone then rang. When I saw my mother's name, I smiled. I grabbed it. Immediately delete this post. She let out a scream. Hello, Mother. Good morning. We're being humiliated by you. I gave a shrug. All I was doing was being honest. You're portraying us as monsters. I smiled. If the shoe fits, that is. Then Dad answered the phone. You don't realize what you just accomplished, Brian. Yes, I believe I do. We get calls from people who want to know if this is real. Our church group, our buddies, our household. Excellent. Maybe you'll learn some repercussions at last. Mom broke down once more. Please, Brian, your folks are where? It's funny. When you took from me, you weren't acting like parents. Dad's tone became icy. Do you believe you have won? You believe you're intelligent? I chuckled. I don't believe I won, Dad. I am certain that I did. I hung up after that, and it felt fantastic for the days ahead. Damage control was done by my parents. They made every effort, creating passive-aggressive articles about family, calling relatives to clarify, and betraying them. Even posing as grieving victims and contacting Amanda and me individually, I choose to disregard them. The globe kept spinning while Amanda ignored them. I wasn't finished yet, though. My folks valued their reputation, you see. Their home was not just where they lived, but also how they were seen. After years of boasting about how wonderful their lives were, they now preferred talking about their exquisitely remodeled house. I also planned a last surprise for them. All of my remodeling receipts were still with me. Additionally, I was able to legally place a mechanic's lien on my parents' house because they never paid me. For those who are unaware, when homeowners refuse to pay for maintenance done on their property, contractors employ a mechanic's lien. In essence, it implies that until the debt is settled, they are unable to sell or refinance the home. I thus submitted a $50,000 loan. And believe me when I say that my folks went crazy when they learned. My mother yelled at me. My father texted in rage. "You can't do this, Dad. Dad, this is our home. Dad, you ungrateful brat, you dare." I simply responded with an SMS me. "It's just." Faced with a faint smile. I blocked her after that. Suddenly, I was finished. I moved on with Amanda. Officially, she did not invite them to the wedding. They first made an effort to appear unconcerned. Mom sent one final note, though, when they understood that she meant it. "Please, Amanda, your folks are where? All we want to do is be present on your special day." She didn't read it. By the way, Josh was all for her. It turns out that he always felt my parents were a little toxic, but after learning what had happened, he didn't want to go too far. "Yes," he replied. "No, they're awful. Well done." In regards to the residence, my parents were forced to settle the outstanding balance of $50. Oh, much more than the $8,000 they first owed me. What's the best part? Their automobile had to be sold. Poetic fairness. Amanda had a stunning wedding. There were no parents present. And what do you know? They went unnoticed. Amanda and I were standing outside taking in the sunset as the event was coming to an end. She pushed me. "Do you believe they have since learnt their lesson?" I smiled. "No way. However, it is no longer my issue." She grinned. "Doesn't it feel good?" I inhaled deeply. It was a clear day. No worry, no strain, just tranquility. "Yes," I said. "It does."